Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me start differently. Why did you come to the United States? When did you enter the United States? When did you leave your home country? With whom did you travel to this country? Did you travel with anyone you knew? How did you travel here? What countries did you pass through? Did anything happen on your trip to the US that scared you or hurt you? Has anyone hurt you, threatened or frightened you since you came to the US? How do you like where you're living now? Are you happy here? Do you feel safe? Do you have any family members that still live in your home country? Are you in touch with someone in your home country? Who did you live with in your home country? Did you get along with the people with whom you lived? How was your relationship with your parents and your siblings? Did you go to school? Did you work? Did you ever get in trouble at home when you lived in your home country? How did your parent or relative punish you if you did something wrong? How often did this happen? So these are some of the questions in one of the intake forms. This specific one is the intake form used by EILA. Maybe there's some lawyers from EILA here. But most of these intake forms are very similar. And they are the forms that are used in court to screen children who have recently arrived and who are still in the process of seeking a lawyer, hopefully a pro bono lawyer, that will help them get a type of visa that would allow them to stay here lawfully, either asylum or usually either asylum or a visa called SIJ. So I just wanted to read some of those questions for you because the questions themselves probably allow you to imagine what kinds of answers are often given. I'm going to read a few fragments from the beginning of the book and then a shorter fragment from later on in the book, and then I'll sit down with Maria. Why did you come to the United States? That's the first question on the intake questionnaire for unaccompanied child migrants. The questionnaire is used in the Federal Immigration Court in New York City, where I started working as a volunteer interpreter in 2015. My task there is a simple one. I interview children following the intake questionnaire and then translate their stories from Spanish to English. But nothing is ever that simple. I hear words spoken in the mouths of children, threaded in complex narratives. They are delivered with hesitance, sometimes distrust, always with fear. I have to transform them into written words, succinct sentences, and barren terms. The children's stories are always shuffled, stuttered, always shattered beyond the repair of a narrative order. The problem with trying to tell their story is that it has no beginning, no middle, and no end. When the intake interview with a child is over, I meet with lawyers to deliver and explain my transcription and occasional notes. The lawyers then analyze the child's responses, trying to come up with options for a viable defense against the child's deportation and the potential relief he or she is likely to get. The next step is to find legal representation. Once an attorney has agreed to take on a case, the real legal battle begins. If that battle is won, the child will obtain some form of immigration relief. If it is lost, they will receive a deportation order from a judge. I watch our own children sleep in the back seat of the car as we cross the George Washington Bridge into New Jersey. I glance back now and then from the co-pilot seat at my 10-year-old stepson visiting us from Mexico, and my 5-year-old daughter. Behind the wheel, my husband concentrates on the road ahead. It is the summer of 2014. We're waiting for our green cards to be either denied or granted, and in the meantime, we decide to go on a family road trip. We will drive from Harlem, New York, to a town in Cochise County, Arizona, near the US-Mexico border. The green card application is nothing like the intake questionnaire for undocumented minors. When you apply for a green card, you have to answer things like, do you intend to practice polygamy? And are you a member of the Communist Party? And have you ever knowingly committed a crime of moral turpitude? And although nothing can or should be taken lightly when you're in the fragile situation of asking for permission to live in a country that's not your own, there's something almost innocent in the green card application's preoccupations with and visions of the future and its possible threats: polyamorous debauchery, communism, weak morals. The green card questionnaire has a retro kind of candor, like the grainy Cold War films we watched on VHS. The intake questionnaire for undocumented children, on the other hand, reveals a colder, more cynical and brutal reality. It reads as if it were written in high definition. And as you make your way down its 40 questions, it's impossible not to feel that the world has become a much more fucked up place than anyone could have ever imagined. We're driving across Oklahoma in early July when we first hear about the wave of children arriving, alone and undocumented, at the border. On our long westbound drives, we begin to follow the story on the radio. It's a sad story that hits so close to home and yet seems so completely unimaginable, almost unreal. Tens of thousands of children from Mexico and Central America have been detained at the border. Nothing is clear in the initial coverage of the story, which soon becomes known more widely as an immigration crisis, though others will advocate for a more accurate term, refugee crisis. Questions, speculations, and opinions flash flood the news during the days that follow. Who are these children? What will happen to them? Where are the parents? Where will they go next, and why? Why did they come to the United States? Why did you come to the United States? I asked children in immigration court. Their answers vary, but they often point to a single pull factor: reunification with a parent or another close relative who migrated to the US years earlier. Other times, the answers point to push factors, the unthinkable circumstances the children are fleeing: extreme violence, persecution and coercion by gangs, mental and physical abuse, forced labor, neglect, abandonment. It's not even the American dream that they pursue, but rather the more modest aspiration to wake up from the nightmare into which they were born. As we drive deeper into the country, following the enormous map I take from the glove box and study from time to time, the summer heat becomes drier, the light thinner and whiter, the roads more solitary. We start hunting down any available information about the undocumented children and the situation at the border. We collect local newspapers, which pile on the floor of our car in front of my co-pilot seat. We do constant, quick online searches and tune in to the radio every time we can catch a signal. More questions, speculations, and opinions flood media coverage of the crisis. Some sources elaborate lucid and complex conjectures on the origin and possible causes of the sudden surge of arrivals of unaccompanied minors. Others denounce the inhumane conditions and systematic maltreatment the children must endure in detention facilities near the border. And a few others endorse the spontaneous civilian protests against them. A caption in a web publication explains an unsettling photograph of men and women waving flags, banners, and rifles in the air. Quote, "Protesters, some exercising their open carry rights, assemble outside the Wolverine Center in Vassar, Michigan, that would house illegal juveniles to show their dismay for for the situation, close quote. In another photograph that we find on the web, an elderly couple holds a sign saying, "Illegal is a crime," and "Return to senders." They are sitting on beach chairs, wearing sunglasses. A caption explains, "Thelma and Don Christie of Tucson demonstrate against the arrival of undocumented immigrants in Oracle, Arizona, July 15, 2014. I zoom in on their faces and wonder, what passed through the minds of Thelma and Don Christie when they prepared their protest signs? Did they pencil in protest against illegal immigrants on their calendars, right next to Mass and just before bingo? What were they thinking when they put their beach chairs inside their trunk? And what did they talk about as they drove the 40 miles or so north toward the protest in Oracle? In varying degrees, some papers and web pages announce the arrival of undocumented children like a biblical plague. Beware the locusts. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. These menacing, coffee-colored boys and girls with their obsidian hair and slant eyes. They will fall from the skies, on our cars, on our green lawns, on our heads, on our schools, on our Sundays. They will make a racket. They will bring their chaos, their sickness, their dirt, their brownness. They will cloud the pretty views. They will fill the future with bad omens. They will fill our tongues with barbarisms. And if they are allowed to stay here, they will eventually reproduce. We wonder if the reactions would be different were all these children of a lighter color, of better, purer breeds and nationalities. Would they be treated more like people, more like children? We read the papers, listen to the radio, see photographs, and wonder. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I know it's a little bit hard to clap after something kind of so dramatic as that. So I appreciate your effort, but thank you for the reading, Valeria. Seriously, I never thought that I would be here at the 92nd Street Y with another paisana talking about this. So it's kind of like, what's going on? And I'm so thankful to everybody involved in making this happen. I'm really, really thankful and glad to be here. I think that this is actually kind of historic. A gathering like this, talking about this issue with this writer at this moment actually feels kind of important and, yes, historic, maybe even a little bit radical. So actually, this is a question that my producer, Antonia Cerejido, decided that she wanted to be the first question. She's my producer, and so I take direction very well. So I'm going to give Antonia credit for this idea to ask you this question, but it's not really her question. The question is, why did you come to the United States?
My situation is very different from the situation that the kids have, the kids that I worked with in court, the kids that I work with in Long Island. I came here for the first time in my early 20s because, like Alma Guillermo Prieto, who you must know, I wanted to be a dancer.
What?
Yeah.
You too? Me too.
You too?
Yes, and Alma Guillermo Prieto. Wow, so all these Mexican women end up in New York wanting to be
Mexican
dancers. Failed Mexican
I'm really glad we failed, though, because I mean, in my case, I was maybe going to add another body to a big choreography, but not really contribute to the history of dance in any way. I never had talent, really. I had a problem. I had a problem with rhythm, which is really a bad problem to have when you're a dancer. So I tried really hard, and I came here and I tried to train with the Limon company. the Jose Limon company, a Mexican who had immigrated from northern Mexico first to California and then eventually to New York in the 1920s, and whom I admired greatly. So I trained with their company in hopes that someone would someday say, "Oh, why don't you join the company?" Never happened. So the only way for me to survive here was to get a student visa and to do a PhD, because it was the only way where I wouldn't have to pay for the education. They would pay me.
The Mexican government would pay you?
No, Columbia University.
Okay.
So most Ivy League institutions for certain careers have to pay you as a graduate student. A stipend.
There are a lot of high school students here, so is that a long list?
Don't ever, if you do your bachelor's and then don't ever do a master's degree. Go directly to a PhD program, and then you get paid for it. And then if you decide that you're not really into academics, I'm really sorry if there's professors here, but that you're not really into academics, you just drop out after you finish the master's. You don't owe anyone money. You don't owe anyone anything.
Okay, well, at least the first part was all above board. So definitely just think about getting a PhD.
But yeah, the truth is it's just better to finish. When you've done the master's, you've done the hardest part. Anyway, so I ended up doing a PhD, knowing that I really didn't want to be an academic, but that I love teaching. I discovered I love teaching in the meantime. And I just stayed. I stayed. There's really no way for me to do what I do if I lived in Mexico. I think this country has given me the opportunity to be able to have a good academic job teaching, and my literary community here has been enormously generous and has recognized my work, the way that it never has, by the way, in my own country. So this is where I am now. This is where my daughter is growing up.
So I want to read a part of your book. It's actually something that ¿cómo se llama? The person, John Lee Anderson, how could I forget, who is like a mythic figure in my life. Everybody that I know knows him, and I don't think I've ever met him. So I'm just like, one day, John Lee Anderson
He's a very nice
guy. So in his introduction to you, he cites this part of your book, but I want to reference that it's from his introduction. He says, you say, "Before coming to the United States, I knew what others know, that the cruelty of its borders was only a thin crust, and that on the other side, a possible life was waiting." You continue, "I understood sometime after that once you stay here long enough, you begin to remember the place where you originally came from, the way a backyard might look like from a high window in the deep of winter, a skeleton of the world, a tract of abandonment, objects dead and obsolete. And once you're here, you're ready to give everything, or almost everything, to stay and play a part in the great theater of belonging." Those words, I was like, no, we're all just playing a part in the great theater of belonging. And we're still playing the part.
I still haven't learned pounds and miles, though, so I forget my lines.
That was the next part I'm going to read, so don't of your writing. But tell me about this notion of, it's really quite disturbing, the theater of belonging. I mean, what you're basically saying is that you, like me, kind of the other, we're so invested in this place, and there's a part of it where it's just like, we're like still like, hey, we don't want to replace you, we want to hang out with you.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, there's...
Thank you.
The thing is that it's so difficult to stay, right? I mean, it's the immigration process, the cost of the monthly rent. It's such a difficult and brutal society. If you don't have medical insurance and you get an appendicitis, you're screwed. I mean, that's it. So the investment in staying is so much that you forget everything else, indeed. And I didn't see it that way then, I think. I think slowly, even in just these past 2 or 3 years, I've had certain clarities that I didn't have in the Obama years, at least. I guess the absolutely sinister everydayness in which we live now makes certain things that were in the shadows so much more clear and apparent. And what I feel now, and that sometimes enrages me, is that in this theater of belonging, the immigrant is expected to, the one who arrives is expected to always play the role and tell the story of the good immigrant, right? Of the one who wants to assimilate. Whereas, no, why don't we ask the question and open the conversation of assimilation not being a way to subsume one's self and one's past and one's language and one's personality and one's modes to what is thought to be the right and the correct ways, but why don't we allow ourselves to mix more? No? Why don't there's something about the myth of migrating to America that implies letting go of so many things and simply abiding by a series of things. This is a country, for example, where this is the second largest Hispanic country in the world. There's 60 million people in this country that speak Spanish, for example. This is after Mexico, it's the US, then Spain, then Colombia. But we don't consider ourselves as a Hispanic country, as also a Hispanic country. And so many of us, Hispanics that come to the US, leave our language behind, for example. So I think that we have to start a conversation about how really we want to play a part in that theater of belonging, how we want to interact culturally, and how we don't necessarily want to be subsumed to the idea of respectability, or how to be how there's only one way to represent yourself as a migrant, right? As a migrant who simply wants to absolutely belong. I think that a more subversive, more contestatory, respectful and willing and humble figure of a migrant, but also courageous is maybe what we need now. No? We need to change the narrative.
And actually, those people on our politics podcast, which you can subscribe to at the end of tonight, which is called In the Thick, actually. In the Thick Show, you can find
really
us
good
and
at subscribing people.
Of course, I'm very good.
I've seen this more.
But we had reporting done there by my colleague Julio Ricardo Varela that actually we have a Bolivian mom of a DACA recipient who, is like, she's like, I've been very worried, I've been crying a lot, and she's protesting. So she's down in Washington protesting. But, she's like, it's been really hard. But then she says, but I'm going to, in very thick accent, but I'm going to stand tall because I'm like a tree. And I'm going to stand tall. And there was something quite beautiful of her just kind of saying, wherever I am, these are how I see myself. And yet the images, of course, of who we are, at least on much of the mainstream media, are so not that.
Yeah, exactly.
Lately, I've been doing a hashtag opposite of lazy because of what General Kelly said when he said that young immigrants, undocumented, were too lazy to go to sign up.
To get a DACA, right?
To get DACA.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just like, no, you didn't just call us lazy. So I'm wondering, the reason why the title of your book is Tell Me How It Ends is because of your daughter, who says, Mama, and how does it end? Y cómo termina? And so I'm wondering about the fact that you decided to have a daughter in the United States.
No, she's my anchor baby in Mexico, actually.
Oh. So you actually did do that. You were just like, oh, okay.
No, I said, no, I'm having her in Mexico.
But that's a very, okay, so what's up with that? Because you're just like, no, I'm not going to have her here.
I mean,
but I'm going to take part in the theater of belonging, but I'm not going to have my child here.
I'll tell you like the full story later, but
okay, the condensed version.
The condensed version. I mean, basically, yeah, I was starting my PhD here, and having a baby alone here, starting a PhD was just not. Plus, like, I went to the first American gynecologist, and I said, oh my God, no, I would not be able to take 9 months of this.
You mean the neuroses of the OBGYNs?
The neuroses, you can't have coffee, you can't do this, don't ride a bicycle, don't. I was like, no, like I can't do this, no. So I went.
Wasn't like that exactly when I was having kids.
No, but now everyone is paranoid and health obsessed, and everyone hates coffee, although everyone drinks it, and everyone. Anyway, so I didn't want that, and I mean there were many reasons. So yeah, first I went to a residence, like a literary residence with my husband in Italy. There, all the women that I met convinced me that 3 or 4 coffees a day were perfectly fine. My daughter is incredibly smart, sophisticated, hates coffee. Everything's okay, you know? She's 8, and yeah, and then the rest of my pregnancy I passed in Mexico, riding my bicycle, dancing, and being perfectly happy. And then I came back. When we amassed enough savings and conditions for me to return here to finish my PhD, we did. That was when my daughter was about 1.5 years.
As an interpreter, you ended up hearing. How much did you know of what you were going to be hearing? Did you have an inkling at all?
I had a crash course with a lawyer who's now become my good friend. I think she maybe is here because she's a super fan of yours. She
lawyer that abandoned
you?
She
wrote to say...
Because you know you wrote that in your book. You're like, my lawyer abandoned me.
No, she's not the one who abandoned me.
Oh, okay.
She's the one who rescued me.
Oh, okay. Well, then we like her. Okay.
And actually, the one that got me my green card at the end, and we became very good friends. But she wrote to me saying, I'm a huge fan of Maria. I'm going to go see your thing. I was like, okay, thank you. So anyway, she's here somewhere. And she gave me a crash course, first on the phone, like long conversations about what it was going to be like, what to expect, what the intake questionnaire was, what the mechanics of it was really. And then I convinced my niece, who's 19 then, and now 22, and now studying to be an immigration lawyer at City College. But I took her, she didn't know what she wanted to study then. She was just coming to New York. She wanted to study here. And I took her with me on the first day to court. And there were too many people and not enough people there to translate for kids and not enough lawyers. So basically, they just threw us in to do the interviews ourselves. And luckily, we had some previous talks with Rebecca Sosa, the lawyer that I was telling you about just now. Other than that, nothing.
Did you know about La Hielera?
I knew about La Hielera from reading, and
so there may be some people who don't know.
So
I know the first time that I heard about La Hielera,
yeah,
and then you hear it over and over again. It was, and I'm still shocked by it because
it's disgusting. It should be illegal. You know, La Hielera is the first detention.
Well, La Hielera means
the ice box.
Ice box.
So ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as you know. So the ice boxes, which in Spanish are called hieleras, are basically detention spaces. The first detention space where sometimes families are taken upon their arrival in the U.S. when they're apprehended. And the maximum time that people are supposed to spend in there is 72 hours, but often they spend much more time than that. And it's called a hielera because it's a freezing cold space. It's basically like being put into a refrigerator for a long amount of time. Children often tell horror stories and say that, for example, they're not allowed to go to the bathroom as often as they need to. They're given like frozen food that they can't really eat. So it's a very unwelcoming first arrival, right?
It is difficult to prove the damage of being held in an icebox.
Scars are.
You don't have a scar, right?
It's true, and
you're not beaten up.
And children don't mention when you. I read the questions earlier. Some of the questions in the questionnaire. One of them is, "Have you been hurt by anyone since you came to the United States?" Something like that, and children don't list that. Often, some may tell if they had a particularly horrible story, may say something about the icebox, but they don't even list it as an abuse to human rights, or as a violation of their rights. What they go through in there.
One of the young people who I spoke to said, actually, it started going really badly the second I got into custody in the United States. That was when I started, and he had made the whole bestia and everything, but he just was like, it got really bad once I got into the custody of ICE. I just think it's important because a lot of people think that something like that you would have children in the United States of America being held hungry, freezing, without a lawyer, and without really understanding without having been explained why they're being held, what's going on. Yeah. I mean, this just feels like the testing of the extent to which you can deny people due process.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And they do, they do have due process. They're entitled to that because those children come here seeking asylum, which is something that they have a right to do, and there's laws that protect them. So there's really, I think, no way to justify the horror of putting children into an icebox. One thing that happens in the iceboxes, for example, is that they're vaccinated. As soon as they arrive, they're given vaccinations. As we are when you applied for your green card, as did I had to get an insane amount of vaccinations, I think, for diseases that don't even exist anymore. And children in the iceboxes are vaccinated. And what happened once, for example, in I think 2016, was that they were given, I think a couple of hundred children were given adult doses of hepatitis vaccination. So they all ended up in the hospital. Some of them very serious health conditions because they had just irresponsibly been vaccinated. Right?
Sometimes people think that this is, especially right now, in this precise moment, sometimes people point fingers at one party or another as being the fault of this.
Yeah.
And I think in your book, actually, you lay so much blame at so many people's feet, including the Mexican government.
Especially the Mexican government.
And especially the Mexican government, which is really fun as Mexicans. Yeah. Thank you for laughing. It's sadly, I think, Valeria, I think one of the things that's really sad for me is to realize, like, wow, it has really nothing to do with party, because on both sides there is tremendous confusion and heartbreak and broken promises and, promises made and then things denied.
Yeah.
How have you kind of processed that, the fact that it is politically kind of across the board?
Yeah, there's many layers to it, though, and it's so complex, right, Maria? On one hand, I would say, for example, as a Mexican, if my entire country was devoted to debating something equivalent to DACA in Mexico, say like a DACA for Central American Caribbean children in Mexico, I would be so damn proud of my country, right? Like this conversation that's happening, the fact that 2/3 of this country believes now that the DREAM Act has to pass, and that the two parties, sometimes for the wrong reasons, but not always necessarily for the wrong reasons, are debating this, is something we shouldn't take for granted. It's also, maybe I have very low standards as a Mexican, maybe that's the problem. But really, I mean, that this discussion would simply be impossible in Mexico.
Even though in Mexico something weird has happened that you also point out. I was so glad to know that I wasn't the only one who was like, what's happening? Because Mexico now has become a country of migrants.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, the United States is forcing this upon Mexico, right? In the sense, well, certainly with the notion of build a wall.
And funding.
And funding
programs so that Mexico deports before they do.
So now you've got Mexican immigration agents that are basically mirroring U.S. immigration agents.
Yeah. I mean, as there was a Mexican politician who died some years ago, and he used to say that Mexico era el patio trasero de Estados Unidos, no? We're like the backyard, sort of where all things are thrown, and in a way, yes, and in many ways, we are to blame for such a submissive acceptance, right, of I mean, the U.S. is the world's economic and military power. It's not like you can just say no so easily, right? But there's little resistance, I often feel, in Mexico, little discussion around important things like this, like becoming basically the chief platform of deportation of Central American and Haitian migrants. The southern border in Mexico is now more militarized than ever. Drones. It looks like someone's sinister fantasy of like a video game. No, I heard recently, speaking to a good friend of mine, a Central American journalist, Oscar Martinez, who wrote a very important book called Los Migrantes que no importan in Spanish and the La Bestia in English. And he was telling me that they've put like these bars like along the train tracks next to the train, so that if you're traveling on top of the train, you'll just get hit by these metal bars. So like the way that Mexico is playing this role in deporting, so that Central American migrants don't even reach the American border, is shameful. And in Mexico, Central American migrants do have as well a right to due process and to seeking asylum, but that's not even a conversation that's really happening there. So, I mean, as fiercely critical as I am of the U.S., I am also of Mexico, and when this particular discussion, the discussion on DACA, I know, I mean, it has been incredibly frustrating for all of us. You have students, I myself have as well a lot of students in that circumstance, where they simply don't know what's going to happen to them in March and then later. But at least there is a society that's mobilizing, that is seeking to protect them. Of course, there's that other horrible thing, which is that they became bargaining chips and for the wall and a series of very, very horrible things. But I think that I think we're gonna win this battle. I may be wrong, but I really think we're gonna win this particular battle.
We're not gonna put a date on when the winning is gonna happen, but okay. I think we're gonna win it too. Just don't know when. There's a moment that you write. This is when on your trip driving with your family through, I guess at this point you're in New Mexico, and it says, occasionally we are overtaken by big pickup trucks, and it's hard not to imagine the men behind the steering wheels. Big men with beards or shaved heads or abundant tattoos. Vigilant, patriotic men who carry pistols and rifles by constitutional right and feel entitled to use them if they see a group of aliens walking in the desert. The notion of kind of the hatred is something also that these young people are feeling multiple sources. So we're going to talk about one of the people who ends up kind of revealing a lot about how he sees his life in this country, and that's the story of Manu Lopez. So for anybody who hasn't read the book yet, just give us who's a sense of Manu Lopez, and why does he become kind of a central character in your book?
So Manu, whose real name is of course not Manu, and he's very angry with me because I don't put his real name in the book, but his lawyer says it cannot be there. No? He immediately becomes visible and therefore more vulnerable. He then asked him, fine, if you don't put my name in the book, at least you put a picture of me. And then, so in addition, there's a little picture of him at the very end of the book, and I sent him the picture that I chose, and it's a picture where he's doing like a back
Oh, that's what it is. I didn't understand it. I was like, what?
It's black and white. It's not,
Oh my God, I love it. Oh, that's
he's doing a somersault in there because he's practicing somersault because he writes hip-hops and dances them and records himself and is getting pretty good at it. And so I liked that picture of the somersault, and that's the one I put in the book when I sent it to him and asked him, hey, what do you think of this one? He says, like, but you can't see my face. So
You're like, I'm helping.
Yeah, I'm helping you. Trust me on this one. But anyway, he was the first person that I interviewed in court, actually. And he was then, I guess, 16. And he was like this very tough catracho from Honduras. Very, like, I don't know, defiant teenager at the end. And we sat one in front of the other. And so he said, who are you? And I said, I'm just here to translate for you. And I said, I'm not a lawyer, and so I can't really help you. I can just translate. And then he said, where are you from? And I said, I'm Mexican. And he said, oh, you're Chilanga, so we're enemies, he said. And I said, yeah, but only when we play football, and I don't play football, so you've already scored 5 goals against me, so let's go ahead with this. And so our relationship started on a very difficult, tense note and in a very difficult space. And slowly he softened. I got to know him more. I got to know his family more. And still now, unfortunately, I am his translator. And I say unfortunately because basically, although he was able to get a SIJ visa, he applied for a work permit that is now no longer
viable.
Caduco, no, caduco. It's expired. It's now expired, and he just simply hasn't received the new one. So he had to get a job that's not great, in which they have to pay him cash because the banks won't accept his checks. He had to leave school because in school he lives in a very, very difficult, very violent town in Long Island, which is the same town where I happen to teach, a town called Hempstead in Long Island. And he started going to high school there, Hempstead High, and after a few weeks, there were boys that called themselves part of the MS-13 that were trying to get him to join them, and he had been escaping from the Maras in Honduras. He had lost his best friend to the Maras in Honduras. They had shot his best friend in front of him, so he had fled. And now he comes to the U.S. and there's the same guy.
And what exactly do you remember exactly what he says about?
He said Hempstead is a shithole, the same as Tegucigalpa. Like, I don't know why I came here if it's exactly the same. And what is very frustrating, I think, for especially for teenagers in that circumstance, is that feeling of like not being able to wake up from a nightmare, that you're stuck. There's no way out, it seems. But there is, like, one thing that I've spoken to him a lot about is that, yes, the MS-13 is also now in Long Island. As some of you might know, the MS-13 is not born in Central America and did not pour over the border, and therefore we need a wall, as Trump says. Trump says that the Mara was basically brought here from Central America. The Mara is an LA-born gang that then returned to Central America when a lot of members of the gang were deported in the 90s. And what happened was that the gang that was kind of contained in the streets of LA in an LA-ridden, a gang-ridden moment. This gang in particular kind of metastasized as a cancer would, and now it's a transnational gang. No one really knows how many members it has. Some people say more than 60,000, but who knows really? And they're all over. I mean, they're in Long Island, in Maine, and all the way down across Mexico and into Central America, recruiting children basically as if they were kind of like, I guess, child soldiers, you know, basically recruiting them to stand in corners and make sure that no police is coming while there's a drug transaction, or forcing children or teenagers to kill other people. So that is the matter, and it's very difficult for kids to escape that. Now, just to end the point, what I have talked a lot with Manu about is how, well, at least, I mean, to a degree, there is the rule of law in this country. There isn't the level of impunity that we see in our countries, no? Where our states, in so many ways, have failed to protect their citizens, and where gangs have become a kind of parallel government. No, we have parastates somehow, parastates in the sense that they have an economy, they control a system of justice, and the government is not able to and hasn't been able to control it since the drug wars began in Mexico. Things have gotten worse and worse and worse. So, well, at least we don't see that here. And if a boy 13 from Long Island says that he's a Mara and kills another boy, and it's happened in the past few years, they are taken to jail. And the Mara really here, and this has been a point that's being made lately, the Mara here is more than a powerful gang, really is a grouping of young people, basically, who have no other way to identify, and therefore join the only thing that might seem familiar. It's not a gang in the way that the gang operates in Central America.
So we were talking backstage, and you were really surprised, Valeria, when I told you that when I came to New York to study at Barnard, left Chicago, and in the midst of my college experience, the wars in Central America were raging. And so that was really the political story, was the United States sending millions of dollars to fund the government in El Salvador and the Contras in Nicaragua. And the thought that in 1984, I was writing my bachelor's thesis about Central American women refugees in Hempstead and Westbury, Long Island?
Uniondale.
I know there was a Berry there someplace, but definitely Hempstead, is just kind of crazy.
I need to read that.
Right, and actually Valeria was like, you need to find your thesis and see what you said. And I'm like, oh my God,
really
I had never thought of. But, you know, there is this, there's kind of the specificity of the dynamic of Central America tied to the United States that people seem to forget.
Yeah, we have no historical memory, you know, that the years of intervention, of American intervention through the CIA or through...
Going back to like the first, I mean, was it 1920, por ahí, the very first time, or maybe not the very first time, but it was, so it's like been almost 100 years of the United States intervening in Central America. I guess, how do you manage being somebody who is very sensitive, and at the same time you're encountering people who are like, wow, really? How do you encounter, what is your reaction when you encounter people who know absolutely nothing about this and maybe have their own prejudices? And I'm wondering if there are people in the audience who are like, I don't know what to do when I have a difficult conversation with somebody and it suddenly becomes very political. I mean, I'm imagining that you base a lot of this on your personal experience in the dynamic, in the conversation.
It's a really good question, and I oscillate between giving an answer more from an emotional perspective, about basically feeling empathy, understanding the story of others, and allowing their story to move us to the point of action. But it's a trickier argument to make. I think a safer argument to make is how at the end we have a series of historical shared responsibilities as a hemisphere, as a region. And it's not about pointing fingers and saying, oh yeah, the Reagan administration was the one that funded the massacre against the Central America, against the Salvadoran population, who then had to take refuge, some of them in the United States, and that's where Namara was born. And it's not about pointing fingers, but it is about understanding the very complex web of relations that tie our hemisphere together. And we are a region. It's the notion of nation state is a very limited notion now to understand a very complex world. I mean, it always has been, but now more than ever. So we have to think in terms of regions. And in this particular problem, there's no way to isolate the countries and therefore try to explain what's happening. It's not like there's a local gang problem in Central America and a local drug war in Mexico and then whatever else in the US. It's years of shared history. And these children that are arriving here and seeking asylum are casualties of a very long war that we as a society here, and Mexico as well, have a responsibility to take in. And the only way we can do that is being responsible enough to document ourselves, to go out and then read history and read the maybe even go to the newspaper archives and understand. So that's usually, I think, the argument that I prefer, even though, through writing and through telling stories, you can also, of course, reach another part of a reader's soul, right?
I'm struck by the fact that, Valeria, you didn't have to write this book. You're a novelist. You didn't have to write this book, and yet you felt compelled to do so.
Yeah, there were many reasons, though. Some of them not really. I don't come across as a very nice person if I tell you, but I will tell you because I am at least an honest person. I was writing a novel before I started writing this, and I was so angry with the situation. I was going to court in that period a lot and seeing what was happening in court, and I was filled with rage and anxiety every single day, and I was pouring all of that into the novel, and the novel was becoming really shitty. Like, it was just turning into some kind of political pamphlet or like long Facebook post. I don't have Facebook. So long 400 pages. So I thought, like, I'm gonna kill the novel with this. That was a very important reason, and I thought, well, I in order to understand what I'm seeing in court, I have to write about. I write books in order to understand things, really. I have a series of questions and intuitions. I never have things to explain or to teach, but just a series of questions. And I did want to understand the situation, so I decided to pull all that rage out of the novel. The novel still has its doses of rage, but it's a little bit more self-contained. And I decided to just focus on writing this essay. It was also a lot of pressure from an editor to write this. I kept on saying no, and he kept on saying, you have to, not my editor at Coffee House, but John Freeman, a good friend of mine and my longtime editor in different projects. He kept on saying, Valeria, you have to write about what's going on in court. And I kept on saying, no, I don't understand yet. I don't understand immigration law well. I don't have enough emotional clarity because I'm so pissed off all the time. So, but that's what editors and good editors do. No? They get their way. So eventually I said, okay, fine, I'll write this piece, fine, yes, fine, you're gonna pay me only that, okay, I'll write it anyway. And as I started writing it, I also lost my job in the middle. I didn't lose my job. I had to quit my job for a while because my own work permit had expired in that period, and I couldn't teach because it would have been illegal for me, and the university, that was a liability for the university. I didn't want to get in trouble either, so I had to stop teaching. And in that period, I had the time, and I had the time to study a bit and understand immigration law, read reports. And when I started writing it, I understood that, of course, that this book was the only thing I could write. Because I couldn't think about anything else. I couldn't dream about anything else. I couldn't talk about anything else. And I thought, if I don't write this book right now, I might as well not write anything, ever.
Tan dramática. We know a little bit about...
Así somos las chilangas.
Right, chilangas, we're very dramatic. So I'm just going to read this last segment, and then, because again, your book ends up being not just about what you're researching and seeing and experiencing as an interpreter, and to try to tell these stories, but it really becomes a whole treatise on who are we.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but someone yawned.
I know, somebody was like,
deep yawn.
We created a real safe space for you, so if you need to stand up and do that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you feel so comfortable.
By the way, I gotta go to sleep too. I'm waking up at 5:30 to go boxing, so that's how I'm dealing with my stress. Boxing and meditation really works.
Oh, yeah? I'm just fighting with my husband all the time.
No,
really,
don't fight
really
with your
works.
husband. No, please don't fight with your husband. No,
but it works too. I mean.
No.
Wait, it's free at least.
Okay, we got to box together. You're a little taller than me, but we'll figure this out. Okay, but so this actually follows that sentence that Valeria writes, which is that you stay and play a part in the great theater of belonging. She continues, in the United States, to stay is an end in itself and not a means. To stay is the founding myth of this society. To stay in the United States, you will unlearn the universal metric system so that you can buy 1.5 pounds of cooked ham, except that 32 degrees, not 0, is where the line falls that divides cold and freezing. You might even begin to celebrate the pilgrims who removed the alien Indians and the veterans who maybe killed other aliens, and the day of a president who will eventually declare a war at all the other so-called aliens, no matter the cost. No matter the cost of the rent and the milk and cigarettes, the humiliations, the daily battles, you will give everything. You will convince yourself that it is only a matter of time before you can be yourself again in America, despite the added layers of its otherness already so well adhered to your skin. But perhaps you will never want to be your former self again. There are too many things that ground you to this new life. Where did you come from? I asked one little girl once. Why did you come here? I'm sorry. Why did you come here? I asked one little girl once. Because I wanted to arrive.
Thank you, Maria.
No, thank you. I'm all emotional. Oh, God, because I'm still trying to deal with my otherness. So there's hope. You're hopeful. Are you going to become an American citizen? How's that as a last question?
I mean, not in this administration, for sure.
Or maybe because.
No, but I get
precisely.
No, I can't yet. I get notifications from my lawyer, these Google things that I have to click yes, no, maybe. And I think it's 3 or 4 more years. 3, I think, that I can apply. And I will. How many? No.
Yeah, like 5 years total.
No, but it's already been a year.
She's got time served.
I've already served
for good behavior.
Time, yeah. Anyway, yes, because it's scary now to travel with a green. I mean, I always get sent to a secondary inspection anyway, but even with a green card. But it's scary, you know, after what happened with the ban, where a lot of people with green cards simply not allowed in, and you're in a fragile situation. And also, I've never in my life voted, and I consider myself an incredibly political person, politicized and actively political, and I've never voted in any country. In Mexico, because I always lose my voting card, and then don't get the new one in time for the next election, or because I'm never in Mexico. Then I became an Italian citizen some years ago because I had a grandfather who migrated to Mexico from Italy, but the Italian government sends you the ballots a month after the elections. So Mexico and Italy are exactly the same. So my only hope is to eventually vote here one day.
Where everything is so above board. All right, let's bring up the house lights and give a round of applause to Valeria. So there are microphones. You need to stand up. And I was instructed by Valeria that if you start to give a speech, she was like, will you stop them? I was like, oh yeah, don't worry. So you have been forewarned. You shall be stopped. But yes, Bard College student.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Am I audible?
You're audible.
Okay. I was hoping that one or both of you might do a little bit of prophecy for us. And I know you don't know the future, but I'm wondering if you can imagine some possible futures in the next 10 or 20 years of what this country's relationship will be with migrants.
Maria, ¿quieres empezar?
With immigrants?
Yes.
No, I know, this is really hard, actually. It's really hard because, you know, my father, Mexicano, nacido en Tampico, from Tampico, my father was not convinced completely about this country. And we were always like, come on, Dad, it's all good. Even though he was the first one who became a US citizen. So I have to tell you, you know, I think I actually said this to you, that it's been strange to, in the past couple of weeks, actually, upon waking or something, it just suddenly came into my mind, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm an American citizen. Because if I wasn't, I would feel very vulnerable. And I have family members who only have green cards, so I do feel very vulnerable. So I think this is not gonna, I don't think it's gonna be a quick fix. You know, what happened when the Obama administration won and the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate, and there was all of this, you know, expectation. That was kind of the moment, and what ended up happening was actually the exact opposite of that expectation, which was that President Barack Obama, a constitutional lawyer, oversees the systematic disregard for due process for millions of people, and then participates in the active deportation of 2 million plus.
And creates a priority docket for the children so that they can be deported more quickly. And I think that our problem as a society has been for a long time to think that it's a partisan thing. And to think that when Democrats are in power, cool, we can relax. Chillax for a while, no problem, they're cool. Not true. The first guy who started putting, I mean, not himself, but who started building the wall between Mexico and US, you know who that was? It was Bill Clinton in Tijuana and in the 90s. So, and not now it's as if it had never happened. So one valuable thing that I think we are learning as a society today is that we can be more present and more active. And we have all woken up from a kind of long slumber in which a lot of us were during the Obama years. A lot of us weren't because people that work, for example, in immigrant communities were very worried since then, or have been working in this all their lives, like Maria. But a lot of others were very comfortable with the idea of having a president like Obama. And yes, I mean, I definitely miss Obama, but in terms of his own ideas and practices around deportation, it wasn't great. So now I think we are much more awake than before. And if we don't fall asleep again, if we get a Democrat, if we get a wonderful Democrat woman next president who is also Latina, amazing, imagine that. They're pretty cool. But then, I mean, yeah, we'll fall asleep. No, we have to be there all the time, active, participating, volunteering in organizations that have been working on this for a long time. And I think that's, I mean, a certain optimistic outlook toward the future, a society more participative.
And I actually having hung out with some high school students right before this, you know, that's where it's just like, yes, we're going to be okay, as long as you understand the power that you wield, right? In owning your power, your voice, your narrative, and not just owning it, but then moving in spaces with respect of owning it. Then it's like, okay. And it's still going to be complicated, but better. So let's end on that positive note. It's all going to be okay, sort of.
We're gonna be all right, as Mr. Lamar says.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think someone was there, and then
you have to come up to the microphone.
You have to come up. So there's someone here. There's someone here, and then.
If you have a question, you have to actually walk up to the microphone. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I want to thank both you ladies for doing the work that you do and for bringing this important issue to light. I have worked closely with Valeria in relation to Manu. So from Long Island, I work with Strong Youth. I'm one of those interventionists.
This guy founded one of the best organizations working in Long Island, an organization called Strong that helps, I'll let you speak ahora, Sergio, pero that helps particularly kids that are more vulnerable than others to falling into gangs or street life.
Right. So I just wanted to make that statement, Valeria. Thank you so much for doing what you do. I haven't read your book, but I'm definitely going to read it.
Come on, Sergio.
You know, and of course, working with Manu, right? Manu is interested in knowing whether or not you're going to come out with a Spanish version.
Yeah. The Spanish version exists, and it also doesn't say his name. But now, I mean, no. My answer to him is always when he gets his green card. The problem is that the lawyers are saying that there's a 2-year backlog, and
I would say when he gets his citizenship.
Even that.
So we're still in close contact with Manu, and Manu, as you already know, he is working. He's going through some issues in relation to the expired.
I know.
Permit that he had.
Yeah.
But we hope that he's going to be able to get that renewed, so that he can pursue, right? The dreams and the aspirations that we know he has, and a bunch of other youth that we work closely with in Long Island.
You have to get him on the radio because he writes amazing hip hops, and my students at Hofstra recorded him singing some hip hops. He got kind of shy, but he did a good job. And then I was interviewed at the BBC World Service, and a piece of his hip hop came out. 60 million people hear that. So he was very happy, but he said, again, you didn't say my name, Valeria.
Gotta wait for a while.
Well, actually, right now, because at Strong Youth in Long Island, we have just, it's been open for quite some time now, our studio. We have a recording studio.
Yeah.
So Manu is working on some stuff that he's going to record, and hopefully it'll be out soon.
That's
He'll
very
get another
cool,
60
Sergio.
million hits.
Well, if any of you are looking for volunteering opportunities, please talk to this man. They do amazing things in Long Island, where help is much needed.
Thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight.
Thank you.
We're definitely happy to be here with all these lovely people that are here. And we hope that together we can continue to do the work that is so instrumental and is going to be so impactful for our young people to have a brighter future.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's very, very important. I hope that it's not just Hispanic high school students who are here, but real Americans who most of them don't really know what is at stake and what suffering there is in the Hispanic community. And one thing that you brought up, which I'm very, very up to date in what goes on politically and with immigration, but I had no idea about the situation in Mexico. Tell me something. Do you mean that the Mexican government is in a back way working together with the Trump administration to also enforce and not allow migrants coming into Mexico? What is the reason for that? Why are the Caribbean, people from the Caribbean and people from Central America is fleeing Central America to Mexico for the same reasons they want to come to the United States?
They have to cross Mexico, right, to get to
Sure,
the United States
sure.
Along the west, yeah. But yes, the Mexican government is collaborating with the Trump administration in this, but actually the collaboration began with Obama. It was Obama signed treaties with Peña Nieto, the Mexican president, who is a man who should be in jail, basically. No, I mean, I say it with not an exaggeration and not a joke. While he was governor of El Estado de Mexico, the state of Mexico, he directed a police intervention on a manifestation that after which a group of women were put inside a bus and raped and thrown into jails and tortured for 10 years. There was a very good piece on recently, not maybe last year, about these women of Atenco, and he is absolutely responsible and guilty of that happened. Yet impunity is always what rules in Mexico. Anyway, Peña Nieto and Obama, shortly after the 2014 crisis was declared, I don't remember the exact date.
The children.
Someone might remember the exact date when Mexico and the U.S. signed that accord, but basically it was the United States injecting a lot of money into Mexico so that Mexico could set up a deportation system that that basically filtered as many people as possible, so less people would arrive at the U.S. border. The problem is that the way that is enforced in Mexico is in many times much more cruel, because there is a less observation. There is not such there's corruption. There's another, and there's not a rule of law that as there to a degree is here.
And the other thing I wanted to say, you mentioned that there are 60 million Spanish-speaking people in the United States.
That's correct. Depending on how you count, there's people that have learned Spanish, there's people of Hispanic origin, but the point is that the U.S. is the second largest Hispanic country in the world, and yet we don't conceive ourselves as such. No. The way that Hispanics are seen here has always been as a kind of foreign presence.
True.
Even though they've been here from the beginning. I mean, the Spanish were here, the conquistadors.
Sure. The
way we understand U.S. history, the way you guys in high school, for example, are probably told the story of this country is sort of the east to west movement, and never the south to north, or that is seen as a kind of foreign intrusion.
Yeah, and lastly, I want to say, in reference to the question asked by the student.
Bye, guys. Thank you for coming. Get home safe.
Bye, guys.
Don't give up. Believe in yourselves, okay?
I think that eventually the presence of all these people, the silver lining of what is happening today, the awakening of the Hispanic community, the importance of their vote, if the emphasis is brought to them and they go out to vote, because historically speaking, they didn't bother in many elections to go out and vote. If they really, really stand up for their rights and start voting, those that can, they will, they will succeed, because that's the only way in this country that you get anything done, is throw out the guys that are no good and get the right people into government.
Thank you.
So that's why I am hopeful that the Hispanic community will eventually get accepted.
I mean, as long as they don't turn to the right too much. That happens also in some Hispanic communities.
Well, that's a very real
they
possibility.
turn right.
And frankly, when you are targeted so much as a community, it's not a surprise that Latinos will just be like, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with y'all.
Yeah.
Y'all, I can be over here
Yeah.
and pass and make it all just be great.
One more question, should we take this guy? And
I'm
then
sorry.
call it a night?
Yes.
Maria, Valeria, thank you so much for tonight. As a Mexican, it's very, very a moment full of pride because I see you guys up there. So you guys talked about scars, right? How these children not scars, but it's like an internal scar. How do you guys deal? Because I know, Maria, you deal with a lot of immigrant stories on your show. Valeria, with all these cases of the children, how do you guys deal with the scars that you yourselves must have?
I'll be brief in my response. It's something that I talk about in the book a bit. I mean, I think my scars compared to what I see are kind of irrelevant. When I was writing the book, and previous to that, when I was going to court a lot, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine who has been, she's my age, early 30s, mid 30s, but has been, since she's very young, persecuting war criminals in Sri Lanka. She's the daughter of Tamil refugees, Tigers, and although she was born here, she's devoted her entire life to that. And now she's building a war archive, so she goes back to Sri Lanka to just get bits and pieces of things from the camps during the war and brings them back and is slowly building an archive. So she's worked with horror for a long time. There's someone that understands horror. And she said to me at some point, Val, you just, you have to find a way to turn all this emotional capital that is building up inside of you into political capital, a kind of agency. And for me, writing the book was part of that response of sort of alchemizing something into something else. And at the same time, thanks to a group of students that I had at Hofstra who reacted to things that I was telling them about immigration and formed an organization themselves that works in Long Island. Now they're being a bit lazy because I'm on sabbatical, so I hear that they haven't been working so much. But when I go back, they'll be in trouble, and they. But anyway, immediately they formed in 2015 this group, very active, and started working with Strong and other communities. And that was a way in which things came into perspective. It doesn't really, I mean, yes, of course it's brutal to hear these stories. It's horrible to feel that you can't do much. And if you're not a lawyer, for example, you can't even offer that kind of important, pragmatic, absolute, real help. But there's ways to turn all of that into political capital. That's what I try to do.
It's rough. I mean, I've been doing this for like too long. Too long. So it does. It's really, I mean, the first story that I ever produced for NPR with Scott Simon when I was a producer before I was a correspondent was a piece about Central American immigrants in detention in Harlingen, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And that was 1985, 86, por ahí. And like, comparatively, it might have been better at that point. There was no MS-13. There, these vigilantes or the kind of hate. It was, so, I think the thing that I do is I really try to take care of myself. I really, definitely.
She boxes.
I box?
That's the way.
Oh, hell yes. I should be asleep already because I got to be up early and boxing tomorrow morning. I actually mean that very seriously. I do that and I do the meditation and yeah. And I don't want to start crying because it'll be like terrible. So I allow myself to cry because that's part of it. Yeah. And I think that having that humanity, you know.
Yeah, you can't let yourself become numb either, no?
Yeah, you can't be numb. So you see how easy it is? Yeah, I just start thinking about all the things that we've had to report on, and it's like, ugh. Thank you for that wonderful, beautiful last question.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to Valeria for her work. We just formed a beautiful friendship because we didn't know each other until
and we decided
tonight.
not to talk to each other in the green room, so it was really kind of.
So we only talked about like makeup and clothes and stuff like that. But
if you talk in the green room, then you don't talk here. No? It's really
so this was really special, and I'm so thankful to her for owning this voice and this responsibility as a writer in this moment. And to all of you to have made the choice to come here, because you could have been doing something else, and
like
you're here.
Like watching the Winter Olympics.
Like watching the Winter Olympics or something like that. So thank you all, and to everybody who played a part, to my producer Antonia and Natalia, and all of my staff here, including somebody who just came here from Colombia, and I was surprised. The other surprise for all of you who know is that I actually interviewed Chameleonaire today. So there, all of you are like, we don't know who he is. But talk to your grandkids and ask.
Your grandkids? They're like 12 years old here.
Yeah, Chameleonaire. Thank you so much for everyone who took part in this, and have a great rest of your evening. Gracias, Valeria.